Welcome to the Fixing Your Crown Boo podcast. It's a podcast to interview dope people in leadership who use the model of servant leadership and are driven by emotionally intelligent leadership, as well as being passionate about lifting others up to empower to success. Because the pie, it is big enough for all of us, and we can all find a seat at the table. Your host for today, my name is JD Johnson, and I'm a coach, consultant, and career strategist turned entrepreneur. I am originally from Toronto, Canada, but I've been living and working in the Bay for the last 10 years. I have an experience of over 20 years in a variety of industries, including manufacturing, retail, CPG, and technology. And I've spent the last 8 years as a consultant with expertise in project and program management, as well as change management. In my consulting career, this is where I really discovered a passion for leadership development and emotionally intelligent driven leadership frameworks and styles. I would love to change the organizational culture landscape by transforming the relationship between employers, managers, and employees by addressing how new and emerging managers and leaders are prepared for the people side of leading teams. Today, it's my pleasure. We have my friend and former colleague, Julian Thomas. Julian is an Ivy League graduate with an MBA, and he is a dedicated husband and father. After earning his undergraduate degree from Dartmouth College, he founded and managed a successful sales company for 5 years. Following his MBA, Julian spent 3 years as a management consultant in Portland, Oregon. Currently, he's emerging as a prominent leader within Portland's nonprofit sector, particularly focused on initiatives aimed at supporting community members at risk of homelessness. Julian manages a local medical program and is consistently volunteered with Impact Northwest. He demonstrates a really strong commitment to serving and uplifting his community. Welcome, Julian. Anything else you want to add to your introduction?
No, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I love the idea of talking about servant leadership and just how important having emotional intelligence in leadership can be to a team. And I love the idea of talking more about how it's impacted me and how it could likely impact others as well.
Thank you. I know emotional intelligence is such a hot topic, I think, right now. We're seeing this landscape of layoffs, DEI being ended in some places. And I think emotional intelligence really helps us move through this world, no matter what the situation is. So just getting started, let's talk a little bit about your current role. You're a trip audit and investigation manager at Ride Connection. You want to talk a little bit about how this evolved and what your role is in that?
Yeah, when I was working with you at Propeller, during that consulting time, I spent a lot of time doing some projects with nonprofits as well. It helped me to learn a little bit more about what my why is and really what it is that I want to do. At Ride Connection, my responsibility is managing the Medicaid transportation program. So I'm responsible for auditing, and our team is responsible for auditing and investigating trips for all members of Medicaid in the Portland area. So it's a pretty large population, and we want to make sure that we're supporting this population as much as we can. This is essentially a group of people that are very low income, and my team's responsible for looking for fraud, waste, and abuse, but also making sure that we can compensate people and support people in getting transportation as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
That is really great. I love hearing how you are in your everyday role that you're helping the community around you. And especially being in San Francisco, the unhoused or the homeless population is a big concern for a lot of different reasons. And so it's great that you're helping this population be able to move around Portland.
Definitely. I think this is when it comes to the leadership side of it, and I'm sure you've seen living in San Francisco, there's a lot of similarities I think in how people that are homeless and houseless are viewed, living in some of these larger cities. And it's really easy for people living in the communities to think everybody that is homeless is on like a fentanyl or going through this situation. And it's really important for me when I'm working with my team in this program to make sure that we're bringing as much empathy as possible to the table, because a lot of times what we see outside only represents a fraction of the actual numbers that represent houselessness in our communities, which is really sad and scary. But I'm happy that we have, at least at this moment, resources and programs that can support them.
It's so important to be able to help this part of the community. And it is certainly heartbreaking how many people end up in this. It's almost a vicious cycle. So it's so admirable that your program is helping to make a difference in those lives.
Appreciate it.
Let's get into the questions, talking a little about leadership. I'm curious, I think this is one of your first or second times being a leader. And what would you say has been your biggest struggle as a leader?
That's a good question. I think, honestly, I would say I feel like I've grown up getting a lot of leadership experience. I was in sports most of my background through college, and was captain of teams in high school, and was captain of my track team in college. And then just getting that experience of managing a sports team, it can be very competitive and intense at times, depending. You're working with a lot of different emotions for college kids. And afterwards, when I was running my sales company, I was in a leadership role, and working as an entrepreneur, managing people. You're working with adults, which is very different than working with college kids. But with my company, it was a sales company. So we worked 100% commission. It was very important that I build strong relationships with everybody, because people weren't staying because of the week-to-week paycheck. They were staying because they believed in following my leadership. They also were staying because they were motivated to hit certain goals so they could hit goals for themselves and for their families. That was a very educational experience in learning how people are motivated. When you don't have a base salary or an hourly paycheck to motivate somebody by, there are a lot of other levers that you really need to make sure that you're focused on. And then most recently, I'm working at a nonprofit now, and we don't motivate people by commission or that type of thing. It's almost the exact opposite. We promote more of an equity lens, and we focus on what we can do more for our community, and we try to create as much balance as we can for people on our team so that they can stay with our organization longer, but also not feel like we are stealing all of their time. We're supporting them not only with their work, but who they are as people. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of aspects of leadership that I've learned that are really by the book, things that you could find written down. And then there's a lot of subjective pieces. And I think that's most of the job, is that subjective piece, and whether it's more important to build the relationship or whether it's more important to find the right resources and remove obstacles for people that are on our teams. Yeah, I've had a lot of different experience in very different formats, but I have found that regardless of what the situation, that relationship piece is a fundamental building block to really be a good leader.
I can only imagine being emotionally aware and having a good grasp on yourself, as well as what are other people's motivators, has to be such a key piece, especially moving through entrepreneurship to doing nonprofit, to being a consultant, all very different ways of leading and being seen. You want to talk a little bit more about like that journey of being a leader between being an entrepreneur versus being consultant versus being in a nonprofit?
Yeah, I think leadership in general, when it comes to entrepreneurship and starting a company, I've noticed that there are different types of entrepreneurs. There are entrepreneurs that are very good at building something, but they find that the company can't really exist beyond themselves because that leadership piece might be missing. You sometimes see that type of thing in maybe a very small restaurant, like a food truck, or maybe service-related private practices for professionals, things like that, where the leadership isn't the focus. It's a little bit more of that skill set you just need help. And there are other organizations where that leadership piece really shows up. And those are the organizations where numbers really add a lot of power to the organization. When I was running in that sales company, it's a numbers game. The more people you have, the more people that are making sales, the more revenue the company generates, and the better we grow, the more opportunity there is to people, the more traveling and et cetera, et cetera. And I really needed to focus on building those relationships. So I invested a lot of time outside of work, going to happy hours with people, teaching people on my team how to organize their time, investing time with them while they work. So they knew that there wasn't anything that they were doing that I wasn't willing to show them how to do or do with them. And I think sometimes when you show those types of qualities, people will stay at a job because of you, because of the relationship, friendship. People spend so much of their lives at their work. If you like who you work with, a lot of people are willing to take less pay, less of a lot of other things because that relationship is so powerful. Most recently in the nonprofit sector, it's a very different direction. When in sales and in consulting, things were so competitive and we were hiring such strong talent. In the nonprofit space, it's a hungrier industry where in some ways people will take what they can get. And it's a little bit more of teaching people how to perform in a way where they don't need to be micromanaged, providing the support where people know that they can spend time with their kids and still get the job done if they can communicate well with their supervisors, and making sure people know that we see them and we care about them. So I think I've noticed that there are some pretty significant ways that leadership shows up when you have all of these ambitions and ways to motivate people, versus a nonprofit where you're really working to support a community and you want people to honestly stay in their role for a lot longer. So the ambitious piece isn't quite there. It's a little bit more on how can we support this individual and how can we support our team in adding more longevity to this career. So it's different, but the relationship piece is still there. I think other things that I found that have been helpful is identifying certain times throughout the year to have leadership development, or finding whether people are interested in more educational growth. In my experience, people need 3 things from a leader or to stay at a job. And it's either their pay, it's the relationship, or to be learning something new. And with a lot of the for-profit work, the pay is such a high lever that you don't need as much as on the other side. And when it comes to nonprofit or fully commissioned type work, I found that relationship piece is so much more important, and education is important too. If people are learning something new, people will go to school, people will pay for school for them to learn things. So it's really making sure that you could provide high quality in 1 or 2 of those areas will create a lot more longevity on your team.
Oh, I love that. There's a couple of things I want to pull out of what you said that I think is so key. One is being the manager and building that relationship and understanding, you remember change management, the within, the what is in it for me. Yeah. And I think that's such a key piece of the building the relationship piece, is understanding what motivates and engages your people. And the other thing that you said that was so cool was around understanding what are their reasons for being at the job, not just motivators, but why are they even at the job in the first place? And the differences between the ambitious motivator factor for profit and in sales and the kind of the corporate world. I think that's really interesting how you dived into how that has made a difference in how you lead, and understanding and being aware of who your teams are and making that time to understand what makes them tick.
Yeah, there's so many different educational pieces when it comes to leadership. There's the whole 80-20 rule in terms of where we want to spend most of our time. There's also understanding what makes people tick. And as I've gotten older and I'm working in environments where a lot of people on my team have families or have different responsibilities, since COVID, we've been in these leadership roles where everyone is fully remote. And being a fully remote leader is also very different from being a leader that works with people in person or in a hybrid environment. You almost have to come up with and add different times for more one-on-ones and more time for subjective relationship building time that came really naturally when we had the whole water cooler time or lunch in a cafeteria or something like that. I really feel that the skill of becoming a good leader is a lifelong journey, and the things that I learned from my mentors and the things that I'm trying to impart to people that are on my team that are doing their best to become better leaders are things that are learned through specific skills, but they're also learned through experience. You're not going to be able to fully grasp and be able to have some of these harder conversations without trying it a number of times, which can be really difficult, but could be really helpful once you get really good at supporting people in ways that could be fun, could be hard. Yeah.
No, I think it's really interesting. Something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is this concept of who do employees leave? So I was reading this research by Culture Amp. They're like this HR platform. And they were saying that they did this survey and people don't really leave managers. But then I also saw a survey by SHRM and they're like, people leave managers. So I think it's really interesting how you dug into the motivators and how if you're not hitting one of the three things, which I think you mentioned were building that relationship, which is getting to know your people. If you can't meet salary and if you can't meet learning something new, then people are going to leave. And so that's interesting how you found in your journey that those are such key things to be able to keep your people.
Yeah, I love that. And I think right now and during this time period, we're in this climate where we're seeing all these mass layoffs. I remember growing up, and when people talk about what was the most secure job long-term, people would talk about a government job this is the most secure job you could possibly have. And that's obviously changing now. There's going to be some trust for some of these companies and organizations that'll likely have been lost, where people, once you've gone through a number of layoffs, you lose a lot of trust with the company. In fact, I would say compared to how my parents grew up, there isn't really that trust for at least my generation, and I think a lot of newer generations for trust of the company. So leadership is so much more important because it becomes more about the person. And I know more and more stories of somebody moving into a leadership role and taking their team with them because people are loyal to the person. There are certain people that I've worked with in the past, and if they had an opportunity, I would love to work with them in the future. And I have found that for me, I'm an ambitious person, and I know that when I grow, I don't know if I'll be at my company for the rest of my life. I just don't know if that's the way the world works anymore. But I do know that there are people that I've worked with and I have relationships with that I will want to do whatever I can to make sure that those people are in my life, because work on a project with this project performs on a completely different level because they're there. And they have a lot of my values when it comes to integrity. So I know that they're going to do the right thing. And I know that they'll work hard, not because of what I'm telling them, but because they're internally motivated to perform at a high level. So I think a lot of the way the world is changing is more around leadership and following individuals that we trust. And it's moving away from trust from a company because of a lot of the climate that we've seen over the last decade when it comes to layoffs and some of the changes that we're seeing across corporate America.
Oh, you bring up such a good point. I hadn't really thought about the flip side is people not leaving their managers, but people leaving with their managers. Yeah. And I think you're so right. It does really talk to being a good leader, being someone that is trustworthy, that you would follow somebody to another organization because you had this connection. And I think in my experience, I've had in my 20 plus years of working, I've had over 30 managers. And I think when you I hate to say this, but when you break in a manager and you're like, this manager, like I can talk to them, I communicate, they understand, they have this trust for me, They allow me to be able to develop myself, and they can see where I can have these psychologically safe spaces to have these development conversations, to say, sure, I'm cool with this job. I like it. I'm learning, I'm growing. Nothing is forever. And I don't plan to stay in this role forever. So what do I need to do? How do we work together? How do I make you a cheerleader for me to be able to make this next step that is the right move? And having a manager that you can trust and have those conversations with, I think that's a big piece of what you were talking about, people leaving with their manager, not because of their manager, because they want to leave a toxic environment, but because the manager was so good and they have such a relationship that they want to take them with them. I think that is a super cool insight that you brought out.
Yeah, I think there's a few ways to look at it too, because especially in this environment, I don't necessarily see it as much as, hey, we've got all these managers that are leaving companies and people are taking everybody with them. But right now, there are situations where it could be a large government layoff like there was yesterday. And there are likely going to be people that are laid off. And because the person that was laid off was a good leader, other people will leave too. That a part of that. And they'll want to follow that person, even if it's not to another company. Just, hey, I don't want to work with this company anymore if it's not going to be with this person. And I think that's going to be something that we're going to be seeing some of. And that's why, unfortunately, when these mass layoffs happen, they're oftentimes not taking into account the influence that some of the leaders there that are on the team. It's more of a blanket situation. On the other side of it, you mentioned something that was really interesting. I've also had a lot of managers in the past. And when you have a manager, you've got to manage up and figure out how to best work with this person.
Yep.
I've had some managers that I know, hey, if I spend some time with this person, I know I'm going to be in a good situation. I want to follow this person. But I also have had managers that have just been terrible. You spend so much of your time working on how to manage up effectively with this person that you're almost, if they were to leave or go, more work would get done and you'd have less obstacles. So there's so much of a give and take in terms of that dynamic between what good leadership looks like, whether it's leaders on your team and in your organization, or whether you're working under a strong leader, that how that dynamic is structured and how that relationship exists really will determine future careers growth and how the career looks for everybody involved. I really love this whole idea around leadership, but also how it can impact us from that manage up perspective.
Absolutely. And I think in my career, one of the things that I learned was this concept of how do you manage your own career? And throughout my career, I've been a mentor, an informal mentor. People always come to me for advice or questions, how to do this, or what are my thoughts? And something that I learned is this idea of leading from behind. And so I think that's a piece of managing your career, managing upwards, is sometimes you're not the person in the spotlight. Sometimes you're not the name of the person who's leading the team, but sometimes leading from behind, asking those questions, knowing when to not be stubborn, knowing when to let control go and give that trust to the person who is in charge is so key in leading a team without the power and the actual influence for it.
I love that. Yeah, leading from behind is huge. I think it can look different in a lot of ways. I found ways that it didn't work. Sometimes when you're working under a team and you have a really strong vision and you want to push things forward, but it doesn't necessarily align with the person in leadership, that can create conflict. And things that I've found that has been really helpful is really trying my best to understand what the values and objectives are for the manager, for the leader. If I know what they want, I can make sure that the work that I'm doing and the direction that I'm going aligns with them, and they're more likely to be more invested and more incorporated in the work because of that. But yeah, I am curious from your experience too, JD, when it comes to leading from behind, if how does that show up in your experience, or if there are any specific skills that have been beneficial in that process? Because it's such an important skill that is easier said than done.
Yeah, it was not an easy one to learn. I think the idea of sometimes you just need to, you're like, get ish done, right? And you're like, nobody's leading or nobody's taking charge. And so sometimes you have to step up into that leadership role. Sometimes, like you were saying, what the person who is in that leadership role, what they want to do and what you envision are not the same. And so one, I had to learn how to let go of my ego, that people have different ways of doing things. And sometimes they're just as fine as yours might have just have been. And so letting go of that ego, that your way has to be the way, or it's the highway, to say, okay, you know what? That is a choice. You're making these decisions, and you know what? They could work. In fact, I don't know if they won't work. So instead of me trying to push my idea and push my way and let my ego take charge, letting that ego go to support whatever it is, that vision that leader has. And that can prevent disruption from clashing of heads, can make the team flow a lot smoother. And it also can engender trust that you are willing to let things go, and knowing when, is this the hill that I'm going to die on today? Is this the thing that I think is so important, that's going to make such an impact, that I need to stand up for it? Or to say, you know what? It could work either which way. My idea is good. Your idea is good. You're the leader. Let's go with your idea. And I think that is what I've had to learn over my lifetime and my working career, is to ask myself those questions and be able to say, you know what? I don't need to be the leader to lead. I can lead by influence. I can lead by experience. I can lead by attitude. And so that's how it's looked for me in my career.
I love that. I love the flexibility there. And that is something that it takes a level of maturity to learn. I think when I was younger in my career, that was something that was difficult. If I see something that seems really straightforward, hey, if we could just knock this out this way, everything will be fine. But that is a different perspective than the manager has. And now what things are happening slower as a byproduct of it. Sometimes you just have to say, hey, you know what? This isn't the hill we're dying on. This project doesn't need to be done tomorrow. It's okay. Maybe this is an opportunity to work on a side project or other things at the same time. But having that flexibility and understanding that bringing multiple perspectives into getting something done is a better way of doing things oftentimes, as opposed to just our way. So I love that. I really love that flexibility. And that's another one that it really takes. It takes the experience. It's not something that people are just going to do intuitively.
Oh yeah, that was a hard one. Ooh, so much frustration. I learned to let go of when I was able to lead from behind or let my ego go. Just thinking about like some of the things we were talking about earlier that I wanted to come back to, you were talking about making sure you had developmental conversations with your people and making sure you have the time to do that people side. I'm just curious around the idea of giving and taking feedback, and how have you incorporated improvements, giving and taking feedback into your leading your teams?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think feedback is one of those things where if it's not done correctly and tactfully, it will not only not work, but it'll backfire. And it's just not what you want. And I found there are a number of different ways around feedback that can be beneficial. One is just the most basic build, break, build type structure of how that works is you build someone up, and then you talk about the development, and then you rebuild at the end. Specifically, when you build the person up, you use you. JD, you are doing great at this thing. And then when we are building up, it's we. So it feels like we're in this together. And then end with you again. So you're never like breaking the person. It's, okay, this is a relationship. This is a team. This is something we both need to work on. That's something that's been beneficial in terms of, it took a while, but eventually got to the point where I wasn't ever giving any constructive feedback without also building before and after to create a little bit of that recency bias so people can remember that positive thing I said too. But on the other hand, there's creating a scenario in an environment where feedback is safe is really important. During my MBA, one of the tools that they taught in one of our modules was just having a feedback session, which is just hey, there's 2 or 3 of us in a group, and we will go around in a circle, and each person will say one thing great about me. And then each person will also say one constructive thing that I could work on. But you can only say one. And when you hear the feedback, all you could say is thank you. So it takes away that defensiveness. And the only way it works is if everybody has that opportunity. So I need to be able to give feedback to you. And I also have to make sure that there is an opportunity for you to give feedback to me in that conversation. And creating that give and take and that flow, we can go back and forth, makes it a much safer environment for feedback. Oftentimes, when it comes to management roles and someone does something wrong, and when someone wants to give feedback, they just say, hey, I've got to have a hard conversation. This happened. I want to talk to you about this. What are we going to do in the future? And it just doesn't work. It doesn't create a strong relationship. It's okay that you feel good having a harder conversation, but feedback really needs to be something that goes both ways. It really needs to be something that is surrounded by a little bit of kid gloves there so that the person can take it in. And it also should be really just focused on one thing, not 5 things. People can really focus on only one thing at a time. So I think if the idea of feedback is something that's really important to me, because I know I've received poor feedback and it's impacted me in a way where it made me feel less than, or that I might not have been good enough because of the way it was brought in. And I would never want anyone else to feel that way. But I also want to grow. I want feedback. I want to become a better person. And so that environment needs to be there. Those would be a few things I would say. One is just how you give it. It needs to be very intentional. And the environment around it needs to be very intentional. And also it's got to go both ways. And being a leader that asks for feedback is something that we don't see very often. And when we do, people recognize it. It creates a level of vulnerability, and that I think earns you a lot of respect as a leader. Yeah, I love that. I'd love to hear more on your end too, from a feedback situation, if there are other tools that have worked for you that I could use. It's definitely a tough thing to do, but it's so important. And if it happens, people feel so good afterwards because they're a little bit more informed and better than they were before, and they felt heard.
Yeah, I think a couple of things that you hit on that are so important. And you talked about this earlier, and I think this is where the foundational layer begins, is you got to create a psychologically safe space. And the only way you can create a psychological safe space is by getting to know your people, getting to know their quirks, getting to know how they give feedback, how do they receive feedback, how do they even just take in any information. And I think knowing that you're building that intentionally with a person can create that psychological safe space. The other thing that I think is really key is the idea of, this feedback is like not about breaking you down. And I love what you said. I think I heard about it called the hamburger, like good, the meat is the bad, and the other end of the bun is the other good. That kind of closes the hamburger or the sandwich together. But I think the key for it is this intentionality of, I'm here to help you succeed. So we talked about servant leadership, and I think that is, we're setting you up for success. We are here to help you succeed and do well in your job. Yes, it has impacts for the company. If you're productive, it makes company money. If you're doing a good job, that makes you happy, and so you feel motivated. So it's this idea that this feedback is not here to make you feel bad about yourself. It's not here to break you down. It's not here to make you feel like a horrible person. But the key thing is that it's here to improve your performance so that you can make the goals that you want to make. So linking it back to that end goal. And I think the other thing for me personally, I will say in terms of giving and receiving feedback is sometimes I think you need time to digest feedback. I've found in feedback conversations like, what do you think about that? And how are your thoughts? And I've noticed for me personally that I will say things, whatever, and it's just coming off the top of my head, but I haven't really digested what the feedback means. I haven't really thought about where is it coming from, all of that fun stuff. And for me, I learned in my career is all feedback, whether it's true or not true, comes from at least a perception of how you've operated or moved through the world or the thing you did or didn't do. And it can be right, it can be wrong, but the key piece is that you were perceived in that way, and that they're telling you how you were perceived. And that is where the magic is, not about whether it's true or false. It's about how that person perceived X thing and being able to understand what you did, because every interaction takes a minimum of 2 people and you're responsible for part of that interaction. And so being able to understand that their perception could be right. You could have really screwed up and take accountability for that. Or it could be you did something and they only saw one piece of it. They only had part of the context, but this is what they saw out of it. You can now control your narrative better. And so those are the things that for me are really key in terms of giving and receiving feedback. And it's not a perfect science. It's something I'm constantly learning to do, to try and take that personal side out of feedback and take it from something you did made this perception. How do you want to change that perception? How do you change that perception if you want to change that perception? Is it something that you have within your control? And so having that time to digest and think through where it all came from, for me, has been really helpful. And so I try to give that grace to other people when I'm giving with feedback.
I love that. I think you said something that reminds me of that quote. What is it? Perception is reality. And that's something that we've got to learn when we're working, especially if you're working in a client-facing role or, generally with other people. Your perception is reality. How you are seen and perceived and how other people understand what you're doing is the way it is. And how we can control how we're perceived.
Absolutely. Something that I saw in some video, I don't even remember whose video this was, but it doesn't always feel like it, but feedback is a gift. And sometimes I have to convince myself of that more times than others. But I try to remember that feedback is a gift of this person telling you how you were received, how they saw this action, what you did made them feel X way. And so I usually need the time to reflect on that gift of feedback before I realize, you know what, at least I know how you saw things versus me imagining how you're seeing things and then being blindsided because I was totally wrong. So I think those are some key things around remembering it's a perception. It may or may not be your reality, but it is a reality.
Yeah, I love that. And one thing that I've learned, and I'm a new father, so I've got 2 little boys, age 3 and 4 right now. And one of the things that I found is perception is reality is very important in the workplace. It does not exist at all in the same way in friends and family relationships. And really, sometimes when we're pushing that leadership muscle at work and understanding that perception in reality piece, it can mess things up at home if you bring in that same perspective, because at home intention is such a powerful thing. If at work my intention was doing a good job but everyone perceived the wrong thing, what was perceived is probably the most important thing. Do it in the way that the work needs it to be done. But at home, if my son's doing his best, it's not about what I perceive him to be doing. Like, his best isn't going to be my best. Is what's his intention? Is he trying to be a good person? Is he trying to help his brother? Is he trying to be a bully? Or is he trying to be someone that's empathetic? And we're all growing in these relationships. They're more unconditional. So they're not based on, the relationship won't end if someone perceives something wrong, where at work, it very much can. I do mentioning that just because a lot of leadership skills can help us personally, but also understanding where some of those barriers are, because they shouldn't be the same. And I think understanding where that line is can be really beneficial for a lot of people in their career, where they build a relationship, they're doing a lot of the right things, but they're also doing things in a way where, hey, this still is work. They say work is family, but we're still it's not the same. But I really love that perception is reality piece, because when it comes to work, it's everything. The sooner people understand that and learn that, the more likely they are going to be to perform at a higher level.
No, it's so true. And thinking about giving feedback and perception is reality all feeds back into this whole performance management part of the organizational culture. Is how do you manage your performance? How do you manage others' performance? And one of the things that I was curious about was, how do you manage your own growth trajectory?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think performance management looks very different depending on the industry that you're in. When I was just to take a step back and just on that idea of performance management, that performance management looked very different in a sales company. It was very much on numbers. The person that makes the most money is the best. Like, that's how it works. Or maybe the person that could build the biggest team, that could be the person that's the best. Those are very clear metrics where people can see how well someone's performing. Right now, I'm at a nonprofit, and we have a very diverse team, not just diverse in race, gender, ethnicity, but accessibility and from disabilities and experiences. And if I have a team of people and we need to get from one side of the street to the other as fast as we can, and one of them is in a wheelchair, we are not all performing individually to see who can get there the fastest. We need one person to push the other one. Like, we need to find a way where the team can be successful and that we can perform at a higher level that way. So depending on the environment and the incentives, I think they can lead to a different type of performance management structure. It's just not a one size fits all. But your question was more specific to me. And I will say for mine, I know that for me, I need to have a goal, a long-term goal. For me, there are a few people that I've seen in certain roles, and within the nonprofit industry, I could see myself being in a COO role down the line, or in a chief program officer role. I love operations work. I love managing teams, but I also love having that vision and board experience piece as well. So right now, I am not a chief operation officer. So in order for me to get there in my development, I need to do a number of different things. One of those is network. I need to build relationships in my industry. Regardless of what the industry is, they are not infinite in size. The nonprofit world is finite. We can look up how much people are making online. You can look up so much information about nonprofits to understand how our goals could manifest themselves in the future. So I network. I like to build relationships with people that are in roles that I'd like to be in, and with companies that I could see myself working with. I know that for me to be in some of these roles, I need board experience. When I moved into my house, which was years ago, I made sure to apply to be on the HOA and on my college board. And those are things that you might not put on your resume, but they still get you some of that experience. But now I've been applying to be on boards within our county for for specific groups. And I work with my nonprofit, the head of our nonprofit, and ask them about, hey, what other types of boards would be a good place to be on? What committees exist within the company that can get me on some of these boards? So that's one perspective. Education is another. I have an MBA, but there are certain certifications that show up strong depending on what you want to do. I believe you have a ADCAR certification, change management, and that's a powerful one. I want to grow my financial expertise, so that might mean that I need to get a license as a CPA or a CMA. There are certain certifications that hold a lot of weight and just put you on a different trajectory versus other people that might be competing for the same position. And then the last thing I would say, so it's education. There's applying to some extracurricular things like the board type things. And then having a role that you want. So having an actual specific goal. The other thing that I think is really beneficial, and this is what we've talked about already, is just that managing up piece. It's really important that your manager, people that you work with, know what you want. You never know what opportunities will come up, and if they think you're here for a paycheck, that's all they're going to talk about. If they think you're interested in traveling, they're going to share traveling experiences with you. And they might share what you want with other leaders, and other people will start to manifest and bring some of those opportunities. It's been really important to me, but I think you really need to attack your goals in as many different ways as possible. Even if it means getting a career coach. I've had a career coach in the past. Things just don't happen. They don't fall in our laps. We don't all have even if your dad runs the company, you still have to have a certain level of competency and a certain level of intention to actually reach your goals. It's very important to be intentional, but I love the idea of the different types of performance growth that we can do so that we can make sure that we're excelling in our careers.
I think you hit on a couple of really cool points. I think the idea that performance management is not synonymous across, even within the same industry, but it also depends upon the industry, what it could potentially look like. I think that's a very interesting thing to remember. And I think the other insight that you gave that I love was around having a goal. What is this vision that you have for your future? For me, I know it was really hard to say this, but I was like, I have my big, hairy, audacious goal. And I don't necessarily know all of the pieces of how that's going to look like, but my goal is I want to make an impact on this organizational culture around the manager and the employee experience, because I think that is so key and fundamental to how organizations have good culture and how does it be motivating, engaging, and productive. So I think it's so good to have that, what is this big goal? And then I think, like you were saying, you need to break it down into chunks because you need to make it manageable. Because if you just think about this sky's the limit goal, that could be very quickly overwhelming. The other thing that you mentioned was around how do you manage upwards and how do you manage that into dealing with your goals and thinking through your goals. And one thing that I like to do is once I have a clear relationship with my manager, I want to ask, what do you need to be a rock star? How is it that I can be a part of my manager's or my leader's journey to help them be a rock star? Because I think it's this idea of a reciprocal relationship, right? They become a cheerleader of you when you become a cheerleader of them. And when you help them reach their goals, then you become a trusted person in it. And so that is a piece of advice I love to give because it ties back into that idea of talking to your manager, making sure that they know what you want to do. But I think you also have to make sure that they understand that you understand the assignment, that yes, this current job that you're in has ish that needs to get done, and you are here to help them look good. And then hopefully in turn, obviously not everybody is amazing, hopefully in turn, that manager will be like, yo, this person got me here. I want to reciprocate that and I want to be a cheerleader of them. Something that I've been thinking about too as well is I feel that a lot of newer employees, even senior employees, don't always know how to create this brag board, this list of things that they do and the impact that they make, and making sure that it's front and center when you do your performance reviews so that you have concrete examples. And I think that's something that I really want to incorporate into my vision is how do you help employees become rock stars and help them make it tangible so that their managers can also be their cheerleader. And I don't know about you, but I've been part of some really large organizations. And what I've seen overall is that no matter how good you are to your manager, A, it needs to be tangible, and B, there's usually some sort of process where they standardize all these different ratings. And it's about giving your manager things to talk about you, that they can be able to stand up in front of this crowd and say, Julian deserves this because he did X, he did Z, he did Y. And being able to help them create that narrative for you is so key in those performance management and performance rating conversations that your leaders will have after they've had their conversations with you.
Yeah, I love that. I think something I would just add to that, because I fully agree with that idea of having almost this list of accolades or even quotes from other people, things like that. So people know the impact that you're having and what you're doing. I also think this kind of goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. We're in the middle of a shift in our work culture, where when we build that list, it needs to be something we keep personally, something on our personal drive, because when you don't want to invest everything into this list for your manager, when if the next time a layoff happens, your manager's impacted and now it's all gone, right? Oftentimes now when I'm thinking of managing up, I'm not just thinking about my manager, right? I'm thinking about my mentors. I'm thinking about people in my industry. I'm thinking about, if I'm looking at the company that I'm in, I'm thinking about other people at that company that are immovable. If my manager's been at the company for this amount of time, who's someone else at the company that's been there for 30 years that likely will still be there before and after my manager is gone and whatever. We need mentors, we need sponsors, we need advocates, and they're not always going to be the same person that looks at my performance, which is my manager, might not be the person that's going to be advocating for me and talking about me in the room. It might be someone else that I have a relationship with that'll push me for a promotion for something that my manager didn't even know about. I do think from a growth standpoint, there are a number of different types of roles that we all need to have. And one of those is your manager, and that relationship is important. But another is we all need mentors. We all need people that will sponsor us. We talk about us when we're not in the room. We need those things. And I always encourage people to make sure they have that list. If someone asks you, is there someone that could give you a letter of recommendation, or could be a reference, or someone that would speak on your behalf? And sometimes we get so caught up in our relationship with our manager that we don't have that person, and we've put all our eggs in one basket. I love this piece on how we work with our managers and how we can work with them to benefit our own growth in the best way we can. But I also just want to keep reinforcing that we need to attack our growth in a number of different ways. It's the only way it works, because we're in a space right now where the world is shifting under our feet. We have to be flexible. And the people that are going to rise to the top are the people that are going to have backup plans and third plans and fourth plans. And if you're only going one way, and once that changes, you've got to start over. That's just not the world we live in anymore. So I think this world of performance, growth, leadership, it looks very different than it likely did when our parents were going through the process. And I'm interested to see how it'll look different for my kids. But I do know the more experience I get and the more relationships I can build outside of just the cookie cutter ones, managing up, managing down, those are going to be the things that set me apart when the next major change happens. I want to be the person that's ready. And I think this is the type of advice that could help other people be ready too.
Oh, you are 100% correct. I love that, thinking beyond just this direct manager relationship in terms of creating that your brag board, your list of accomplishments. And I think we need to normalize that managers come into that too with, hey, to help me help you. It's good if you keep a list of your achievements that we can talk about. And that will help us show the impact, not just to me, but to your skip level, the person who's above me, several that are above me. And I really love the fact that you talked about attacking your career and your goals and your growth from multiple ways. And in this age where, number one, AI is exponentially growing and exploding, we need to be agile and continue to upskill ourselves and continue to be curious. I think that is so important, that we can't rest on our laurels of what worked 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, what worked in our parents' age. We really have to be strategic, have our backup plans, have plan A, B, C, and D. And also in terms of managing our career, normalize having this relationship with mentors, advisors, your manager, their skip level, keeping that going and a constant kind of, thing in your back pocket and making it evergreen so that it's not just for that particular organization. Because as you and I both know, having been laid off in the last year, whatever plans you had with that company, the moment that they decide that you are no longer needed or they can't afford you or whatever reason that they're giving, you're gone. And all that you had with that company, you now need to start fresh someplace else. So I think that is so key, to be agile, continuously learning, and that growth mindset.
Definitely. I love this. I really appreciate you bringing up this topic. And I think it's just so important to keep in mind. And I love that piece on the layoffs as well, that we can go into these jobs and these careers with this old school expectation that we're going to be here for the next 30 years or something. But the reality of it is there's so much we can learn and so much we can gain from these experiences. And these relationships don't have to be permanent to be successful. And if we can go in with our eyes wide open, hey, I don't know if I'm going to be here forever, but I want to get as much as I can from this experience. I also want to give as much as I can to this experience in a way where it benefits. And I also want to make sure that I have relationships outside of this job and growth happening outside of just this job, whether it's in education, whether it's in networking, or whether it's in other roles that I have, whether it's in board positions or supporting our community in other ways. That'll make sure that if something happens, which something inevitably will always in any industry, that we're not a victim of the circumstance. Instead, we're someone that sees it as a gift. I'm seeing that evolution happening more and more people I know, and more people I know have experienced the layoff experience. And the more we can get more out of these experiences, the better. Just consulting in general, when you think of the Big Four and some of these larger firms, they're created and they're structured in a way to move people either up or out. That's just the nature of the beast. And that's not a bad thing, because the experience people get from consulting is you can't duplicate it in a lot of other ways. It's just such good experience. But if people feel surprised in every time something happens or a shift happens in the industry, it forces people to start over. And that is just not conducive for our development. So I really love this topic. I love everything that you've said. And just really grateful to have someone like you in my corner, JD, and someone that is so knowledgeable in this space for me to ask for advice.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. And I know we're bumping up onto our time. So I just want to thank you so much for being a part of this show. And if you have one last thought that you want to share before we sign off for today.
Yeah, the last thought I would say to leave anybody with is just try your best to just maintain a student mentality. I've learned things in this conversation that I didn't know before. I think we're in a world where we're all living in our own silos, and the more remote work grows, the more we feel more siloed, and that what we see on social media or on YouTube is the way things should work. And that isn't true. It's the world still functions based on relationships. We still learn. There's still so much we don't know. And I just hope that anybody that listens to this is able to take something from this and utilize it. And if there's something that anyone heard that they think, hey, you know what, I wish they would have mentioned this other thing, reach out to me, reach out to JD, and I just love any opportunity to grow and learn. And I think this podcast is an excellent opportunity to support growth and knowledge transfer. So I'm really grateful, and yeah, have a student mentality would be my leaving thought.
Thank you, Julian, so much for being part of the Fixing Your Crown Boo podcast. As you said, we're here to empower and uplift others, and this conversation is really about everyday people who are doing super cool things and have really amazing thoughts that we want to share. And like you were saying, being a student, constantly learning, and this is what this show is meant to be about. So thanks again, Julian, for being a part of my journey.
Thank you for having me.
My audience, hope you enjoyed today's session of Fixing Your Crown Boo. You will be able to see us upcoming soon. Thank you very much.